I want you to stop for 1 second before you read any further. Think about the one thing you've been saying you will do for the last 6 months, the business you will start, the body you will build, the debt you will clear, the skill you will learn, the life you promise yourself is coming. Now ask yourself honestly, what has actually changed? If the answer is nothing or not enough, this book will be the most uncomfortable and most important conversation you have ever had with yourself. Here is a truth nobody in your life will say to your face. Your problem is not your circumstances. It is not the economy, your upbringing, your lack of time, your lack of money, or your lack of connections. Millions of people with worse circumstances than yours have built extraordinary lives. Your problem, and I say this with full respect and zero cruelty, is that you have developed a world-class talent for creating reasons why today is not the right day to begin. You've become an expert in excuses, not the obvious excuses, not the ones you would be embarrassed to say aloud, the sophisticated ones, the ones that sound exactly like wisdom. I am still preparing. I am waiting for the right opportunity. I will start when things settle down. I need to learn more before I act. These are not the excuses of a lazy person. They are the excuses of a capable, intelligent person who has mastered the art of feeling productive without actually producing anything that changes their life. This book is the end of that pattern. Not gradually, not eventually. Today, here is what is about to happen to you. In the next 10 chapters, you're going to encounter 10 specific disciplines, not motivational principles, not abstract philosophies, but concrete mental operating systems that people who consistently achieve extraordinary things use, often without even knowing they use them. Each chapter dismantles one specific excuse-generating pattern and replaces it with a working alternative. Each one is grounded in a real human story, someone who faced the exact situation you face and made a different choice, with results that will make you uncomfortable in the best possible way. By the time you finish this book, you will not merely feel motivated. Motivation is a feeling. Feelings pass. You will have something better, a system, a set of non-negotiable internal rules that produce results whether you feel like it or not. Because here's the most important thing I will say in this entire book, and I am putting it in the introduction so you cannot miss it. Discipline is not something you feel. It is something you decide. The people you admire, the ones building businesses, transforming bodies, writing books, building financial freedom, creating art that moves people, they do not feel more motivated than you. They do not have more hours in the day. They are not operating with some genetic advantage that you were denied. They made a decision, a clean, complete, unambiguous decision that the version of their life they wanted was worth more to them than the comfort of the life they had. And then they built a set of daily disciplines that made that decision real, one repeated action at a time. That is the whole secret. And this book is going to show you exactly how to do it. One more thing before we begin. There is a man named David Goggins who grew up in poverty, was abused as a child, struggled with obesity and undiagnosed learning disabilities, and became one of the most physically accomplished human beings in recorded history, a Navy SEAL, an ultramarathon runner, the holder of a world pull-up record, and a man whose mental framework for pushing past limitation has influenced millions of people worldwide. He said something that I want you to hear before we go a single page further. We live in a world where we are all very comfortable being comfortable. The hard part, the part that separates the exceptional from the average, is choosing to be uncomfortable on purpose. Choosing to be uncomfortable on purpose. That is what this book asks of you. Not perpetual suffering, not the elimination of all pleasure, but the specific, deliberate, repeated choice to do the important thing instead of the easy thing, in the moments when both options are available and the easy thing is screaming the loudest. 10 disciplines, 10 chapters, 10 opportunities to become someone you have not yet been. Let us begin. Chapter 1, the identity shift. Stop trying to change your behavior. Change who you are. As James Clear says, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. There was a woman named Maria who spent 12 years trying to lose weight. Not 12 years of failure, 12 years of cycles. She would make a decision, start a program, lose 15 pounds, feel extraordinary for approximately 6 weeks, then find herself back at the beginning. The programs were not bad. Her willpower during the good periods was genuine. She was not lazy or weak-willed. She was, in fact, highly disciplined in every other area of her life. A successful project manager who consistently delivered complex results on tight deadlines at work. The problem, as her nutritionist finally identified it, was not behavioral. It was identity-based. At work, Maria thought of herself as a professional, a person who delivered, someone for whom missing a deadline or producing substandard work was simply incompatible with her self-concept. She did not need motivation to meet her work deadlines. She did not need willpower to show up professionally. These behaviors were automatic because they were expressions of who she understood herself to be. When it came to fitness, Maria thought of herself as someone who was trying to get healthy, not someone who was healthy, not an athlete, not a person for whom physical discipline was simply part of their identity. She was a regular person who was currently attempting a health improvement project. The difference sounds small. The behavioral consequence is enormous. When you are trying to get healthy, every difficult food choice is a sacrifice. Every missed workout is a failure. Every social occasion involving indulgence is a threat. When you are a healthy person, when that is simply who you are, these same situations present themselves completely differently. A healthy person does not struggle heroically to skip the dessert. They simply do not eat it because it is not what people like them do. The behavior flows from the identity without requiring energy. The psychologist William James, who founded modern American psychology and who understood the relationship between self-concept and behavior better than almost anyone before or since, wrote, "The greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives." He was not speaking metaphorically. He was describing a mechanistic reality. Change the self-concept and the behavior that flows from it changes automatically. Maria's nutritionist gave her a single instruction that changed everything. Stop saying, "I am trying to be healthier." Start saying, "I am a healthy person." Every day, in every relevant situation, even before it felt true, especially before it felt true. This is not positive thinking. It is identity engineering. The mechanism behind identity change. Here is how it works neurologically. The brain's primary function is prediction. It works constantly to build models of what to expect from the world and to generate behavior consistent with those models. The self-concept is the most fundamental model the brain holds. It is its prediction about how a person like you behaves in any given situation. When your behavior and your self-concept conflict, the brain experiences what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a genuinely uncomfortable state that the brain works hard to resolve. The resolution can go one of two ways. You can change your behavior to match your identity, or you can change your identity to match your behavior. Most self-improvement advice attacks the behavior side of this equation. It gives you strategies, systems, and accountability structures to force behavior change. These work for a while, but they require ongoing effort to maintain because they are working against the self-concept, not with it. Identity-first change attacks the other side. It changes the self-concept first. And when the self-concept changes, the behavior that flows from it changes automatically, not as an act of willpower, but as a natural expression of who the person understands themselves to be. This is why people who have genuinely transformed any area of their lives rarely describe the process as a constant struggle. They describe a threshold, a point at which they stopped being someone working to change and became someone who had changed, not in their circumstances, not in their results, in their understanding of who they were. The sentence that changes everything. Here is the practical application. In every area of your life where you want different results, you are currently operating from one of two self-descriptions. Either, "I am a person who is trying to X," or "I am a X person." The first description positions a desired identity as external, something you are moving toward. The second positions it as internal, something you already are, expressing itself in the world. The novelist and poet Hermann Hesse captured this distinction with characteristic elegance. I have always believed, and I still believe, that whatever good or bad fortune may come our way, we can always give it meaning and transform it into something of value. The transformation begins in the interpretation, the story you tell about who you are. Your assignment before you proceed to Chapter 2. Identify the single most important identity shift available to you, not the behavior you want to change, the person you want to become. Write it down as a present tense statement of fact. Not, I want to be financially responsible. Not, I am trying to build a business. Choose the identity and claim it. I am a financially responsible person. I am an entrepreneur. I am someone who finishes what they start. Say it out loud. It will feel strange. It will feel dishonest. Say it anyway. The discomfort you feel is not evidence that it is false. It is evidence that it is new. New identities always feel like costumes before they feel like skin. Maria lost the weight. She has maintained the result for 6 years. She told me, I did not change my habits. I changed who I thought I was. The habits came automatically after that. They always do. Chapter 2, The One Thing Principle. Scattered effort builds nothing. Focus builds everything. As Confucius says, the man who chases 2 rabbits catches neither. In 2003, a 31-year-old entrepreneur named Gary Keller was watching his business empire, which he had spent a decade building, begin to collapse simultaneously from multiple directions. Keller had built a real estate company from scratch. It was growing, but in his hunger to capture every opportunity in front of him, he had expanded into multiple businesses, each requiring his attention, each pulling at his time and energy, none receiving enough of either to truly flourish. He was working 18-hour days and watching all of it slowly deteriorate. In a meeting with Mentor, Keller was handed a single instruction that would eventually become the title of a best-selling book and a complete restructuring of professional philosophy. What is the one thing you could do right now that would make everything else easier or unnecessary? Keller returned to his core business. He focused with ferocity he had not brought to any single thing in years. Within a decade, Keller Williams became the largest real estate company in the world by agent count. The lesson is not about real estate. It is about the devastating cost of scattered focus and the disproportionate reward of concentrated effort. The math of focus. Here is an analogy that makes the principle viscerally clear. Sunlight falls on your skin every day. At normal levels of diffusion, it warms you gently, pleasant but not transformative. Take that same sunlight and focus it through a magnifying glass onto a single point, and it ignites. The energy is identical. The outcome is completely different. The difference is concentration. Your daily effort is sunlight. The question is whether it is diffused across 20 projects or focused through the glass of singular attention onto the one thing that matters most. Most people, when they examine their daily activity honestly, discover that they are working very hard and producing very little progress on the things that matter most, not because they are inefficient, but because their effort is distributed across so many things that no single thing receives enough concentrated attention to genuinely move. Productivity researcher Cal Newport spent years studying what he calls deep work, the state of focused, uninterrupted, cognitively demanding effort that produces results that actually advance careers and projects. His research produced a finding that many high performers have confirmed through experience. For hours of genuine deep focus produces more meaningful output than 12 hours of distracted, interrupted, multitasked activity. 4 verses 12. Focus versus diffusion. The sunlight and the magnifying glass. Blessing's single bet. Blessing had been building her online business for 2 years while working full-time. She had a social media presence, a podcast, a YouTube channel, an email list, a freelance consulting practice, and 3 partially written ebooks. She was, by any measure, extraordinarily busy. She was also earning approximately 40,000 naira per month from the business. Not because her content was poor, but because nothing had reached sufficient critical mass to generate meaningful returns. Her mentor asked her, if you could only keep one of these, which one would it be? She chose a consulting practice. It was the most direct expression of her expertise, the one with the clearest path to revenue, and the one she found most energizing. For 3 months, she stopped everything else and focused exclusively on building consulting practice. She refined her offer, built a clearer client acquisition process, improved her service delivery, and asked every satisfied client for a referral. In month 4, her revenue tripled. In month 6, she quit her job. Within a year, she had rebuilt the other platforms, but from a position of financial stability and with the singular focus that came from having already built one thing to genuine strength. I spent 2 years doing 10 things, she told me. I needed 3 months to learn that one thing done properly beats 10 things done distractedly. The deep focus system. Here is a practical system that produces the focus blessing discovered. Step 1. Identify your one thing, not your top 5 priorities, not your most important projects. The single output that, if produced consistently, would create the most significant forward movement in your most important goal. This requires honesty that most people avoid because choosing one thing means consciously deprioritizing everything else, and that feels like loss. Step 2. Protect a daily block of uninterrupted time for that one thing, not an hour squeezed between other commitments. A dedicated, non-negotiable block, minimum 90 minutes, ideally 2 to 3 hours during your peak cognitive hours, with phone off, notifications disabled, and the entire environment configured for the single purpose of advancing the one thing. Step 3. Measure only the input, not the outcome. You cannot control whether the business succeeds. You cannot control whether the manuscript sells. You cannot control whether the fitness results appear on the timeline you want. What you can control is whether you showed up for your focus block today. Track that, protect that, honor that above everything else in your schedule. The philosopher Seneca, who, as a senior Roman statesman in the 1st century, understood busyness and distraction as well as anyone who has ever lived, wrote with characteristic directness, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it." He was not describing laziness. He was describing exactly what Blessing experienced. Effort without focus, which is the most sophisticated form of productive time wasting available to ambitious people. Your excuses about not having enough time will evaporate the moment you stop trying to do everything and start committing to one thing done with full intensity. 2 rabbits. Every ambitious person knows the feeling of chasing both. The discipline is catching one. Chapter 3. The compound effect of small actions. Why nothing seems to work until suddenly everything does. As Robert Collier says, success is a sum of small efforts, repeated day in and day out. In 1952, a woman named Florence Chadwick attempted to swim from Catalina Island to the California coast, a distance of approximately 21 miles through cold, fog-covered water surrounded by sharks. She had already completed several historic long-distance swims, including being the first woman to swim the English Channel both ways. At the 15-mile mark, with less than 2 miles remaining, Florence stopped swimming. She asked to be pulled into the escort boat. The reason she gave was not exhaustion. It was not cold. It was fog. She could not see the shore. She told reporters afterward, "I'm not making excuses, but if I could have seen land, I could have made it." 2 months later, she swam the same route again. She made it. In fact, she beat the men's record by 2 hours. When asked what was different the second time, she said, "I kept a mental image of the shoreline in my mind the whole time." Florence Chadwick's story is a perfect analogy for what compound growth feels like from the inside. You're moving, working, putting effort, and you cannot see the shore. There is no visible sign that any of it is working. And in that invisibility, the temptation to stop becomes overwhelming. Most people stop just before the shore appears. The mathematics of the invisible period. Here's the thing about compound growth that nobody prepares you for. It is brutally invisible for most of its duration. Imagine you fold a piece of paper in half, then in half again, then again. After 10 folds, the paper is approximately the thickness of your hand. After 20 folds, it is the height of a 12-story building. After 42 folds, it reaches from the earth to the moon. But between fold 1 and fold 30, nothing dramatic is visible. You're just folding paper. The incremental change at each step is modest, unmemorable, easily dismissed as insignificant. The explosive growth is entirely concentrated at the tail end of a process that looked unremarkable for most of its duration. This is exactly how the compound effect works in human performance, business building, skill development, and financial growth. The early results are modest, sometimes invisible. The system appears to be failing. The beach cannot be seen through the fog, and the people who stop here, who interpret the absence of visible results as evidence that the effort is pointless, never experience the exponential phase that those who keep swimming eventually reach. The American essayist and philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson understood this mechanism long before behavioral science confirmed it. He wrote, "That which we persist in doing becomes easier to do, not that the nature of the thing has changed, but that our ability to do it is increased." He was describing the compound effect at the level of capability. The thing that was hard last month is easier this month, not because the challenge decreased, but because you increased, and that increase compounds. Chukwuemeka is 2 years. Chukwuemeka started writing daily content about personal finance on a blog and social media channels in January of a particular year. He was consistent. He published something every single day, whether it was read by 10 people or 10,000. For the first 8 months, his total audience across all platforms was fewer than 500 people. He received occasional kind comments, a handful of shares, and almost no evidence that his daily effort was building anything significant. In month 9, one of his posts was shared by a larger account. His audience doubled in a week. By month 14, he had been invited to speak at 3 events. By month 18, he had secured brand partnerships. By month 24, the daily content habit he had maintained through 8 months of invisibility was generating more than double his previous full-time income. He told me, "Everyone sees the brand deals. Nobody saw the 8 months I published to an audience of 300 people who mostly didn't respond. That 8 months was the whole game. The rest was just the shore becoming visible." The 1% Better Framework. The British cycling coach Dave Brailsford, who transformed the British national cycling program from consistent underperformance to extraordinary international dominance, described his philosophy as the aggregation of marginal gains. His team identified every single variable that influenced cycling performance, from the obvious, training, nutrition, to the seemingly trivial, the angle of the seat, the warmth of the massage gel, even the quality of sleep, for which they brought their own mattresses to competitions, and improved each by 1%. Individually, none of these improvements was transformative. Cumulatively, they produced athletes who won multiple Olympic gold medals and Tour de France victories. 1% better every day. Not 10% better every week. Not 50% better every month. 1% daily, without exception. This is not a comfortable framework for ambitious people, because it resists a dramatic gesture and demands the ordinary one. It does not reward the spectacular sprint. It rewards the quiet, consistent, unspectacular showing up. Your assignment: identify one specific daily action in your most important goal area, small enough that there is no legitimate excuse for missing it, important enough that doing it every day will compound into something extraordinary. Do it today. Do it tomorrow. Do it on the days when you cannot see the shore. The shore is there. It always was. Chapter 4. The Discipline of Discomfort. As Eleanor Roosevelt says, your comfort zone is not protecting you. It is shrinking you. In the summer of 1914, an explorer named Ernest Shackleton posted a newspaper advertisement in London that has become one of the most famous recruitment notices in history. It read, in its entirety, men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. He received over 5,000 applications. Something in a significant number of human beings responds to the call of genuine challenge. Something in us recognizes, at a level below conscious reasoning, that the life of comfort and safety, while pleasant in the present, produces a specific kind of slow withering that the life of challenge does not. And yet, in practice, most people organize their entire existence around the avoidance of discomfort. They take the safe option at work. They avoid the difficult conversation. They do not attempt the thing that might fail publicly. They stay in the familiar, even when the familiar is making them small. The psychologist Abraham Maslow, who spent his career studying the conditions under which human beings flourish, described what he called the growth choice and the safety choice. In every moment of decision, he observed, human beings face these two options, the choice that expands itself and the choice that protects it. The growth choice is almost always uncomfortable. The safety choice is almost always small. Life is either a daring adventure, wrote the author and activist Helen Keller, or nothing at all. Keller had survived experiences that would have justified a life of permanent retreat. Blind and deaf from infancy, dependent on others for her most basic navigation of the world. She chose the daring adventure. The woman who had every legitimate reason to choose safety chose growth, and in doing so gave the world an example that continues to challenge comfortable people more than a century later. The shrinking zone. Here is the uncomfortable truth about comfort zones that most people discover only in retrospect. They are not stable. They are not a permanent safe harbor that you maintain by staying inside. They shrink when you do not challenge them. The person who avoids public speaking does not simply stay at the same level of discomfort around public speaking. Every avoided opportunity increases the discomfort for the next one. The comfort zone contracts. What was manageable last year becomes unbearable this year. The person who avoids financial risk does not merely stay at the same level of financial courage. They become progressively less capable of tolerating any financial uncertainty at all. Comfort zones expand through use and shrink through avoidance. The only way to maintain them is to continuously press against their edges. The only way to grow them, to become the person who can do what you currently cannot, is to deliberately, repeatedly choose the uncomfortable option. This is what Shackleton's 5,000 applicants understood intuitively. The life of challenge is not merely exciting. It is the only life in which the self does not diminish. Taiwo's decision. Taiwo was a talented software engineer who had spent 4 years avoiding one specific conversation. The conversation in which he would ask his manager for a promotion he had been clearly deserving for at least 18 months. Every quarter, the conversation approached. Every quarter, Taiwo found a reason to delay. He was not ready. The timing was not right. He needed one more project to strengthen his case. The real reason, which he acknowledged only to himself in rare moments of honesty, was that he was afraid of being told no. The safety choice, never asking, never being rejected, felt better than the growth choice. In the 4th year, his company restructured. 3 of his colleagues, none of whom he considered more talented or more deserving than himself, received promotions in the new structure. Taiwo did not, because no one knew he wanted one. He had never said so. He told me, "I protected myself from the discomfort of being told no for 4 years. And in doing so, I told myself no 400 times instead. One difficult conversation would have cost me 30 seconds of discomfort. Avoiding it cost me 4 years of stagnation." He had his conversation the following month. He received the promotion. The discomfort practice. The discipline of discomfort is not about seeking pain for its own sake. It is about the specific practice of deliberately choosing each day one thing that expands rather than protects, one small growth choice over one small safety choice. This might be as simple as speaking up in a meeting when you would normally stay silent, sending a message you've been drafting for weeks, starting the project that might fail, attending the event where you will not know anyone, applying for the opportunity you are not sure you are qualified for. The specific action matters less than the pattern. The pattern is, every day, at least once, choose expansion over contraction. The American author and researcher Brené Brown, whose work on courage and vulnerability has influenced millions of people, summarized this with characteristic precision. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is our greatest measure of courage. She was describing the discomfort practice in its purest form. The willingness to be seen trying, to be seen failing, to be seen wanting something you have not yet obtained. Your comfort zone is either growing or shrinking. There is no maintenance option. Choose your direction. Chapter 5, The Energy Architecture. As Jim Rohn says, you cannot build a successful life on a depleted body. Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. In 1999, a researcher named K. Anders Ericsson published findings from a study of elite violinists at the Berlin Academy of Music that contained a detail most people overlooked in a rush to discuss his famous 10,000 hours finding. All of the top-tier violinists, Ericsson found, practiced intensely, but the specific pattern of their practice had something in common beyond the number of hours. They all protected their sleep with unusual commitment, took deliberate rest between practice sessions, and maintained a consistency of physical care that the average musicians in the study did not. The top performers were not merely better at practicing music. They were better at building and protecting the physical and mental energy that makes peak performance possible. This is the discipline most high achievers discover late. Your productivity is not primarily a function of your time management. It is a function of your energy management. You can have perfect time allocation and accomplish almost nothing if the energy you bring to that time is depleted, scattered, or running on fumes. The 4 energy systems. High-performance researcher Tony Schwartz spent years studying what separates sustainable high performers from people who burn out, and identified 4 energy systems that must be managed for consistent excellence. Physical energy is a foundation, the raw fuel of the body. Sleep quality, nutrition, movement, and recovery time are not optional lifestyle preferences. They are the infrastructure of performance. Research from a Harvard Medical School Division of Sleep Medicine has demonstrated that the cognitive impairment from 17 hours of consecutive wakefulness is equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.05, legally impaired in most countries. Most people are routinely operating at this level and attributing their poor performance to lack of talent or motivation. Emotional energy is a capacity to sustain positive, constructive emotional states rather than reactive, draining ones. Chronic stress, unresolved conflict, unexpressed negative emotion, and the constant microdrains of environments that require you to suppress your authentic responses. These do not merely feel bad. They consume enormous cognitive resources that could otherwise be directed toward building the life you want. Mental energy is a capacity for focused, creative, and complex thought. This energy is finite and depletes predictably throughout the day. Research on decision fatigue, the deterioration of decision quality with each successive decision, demonstrates that mental energy is a real, limited resource. Elite performers protect their peak mental hours for their most important cognitive work and schedule routine tasks for times of lower mental acuity. Spiritual energy, what Schwartz calls purpose energy, is the sense of connection to something that matters beyond immediate circumstances. People who have a clear sense of purpose, who understand why their work matters and how it connects to their deepest values, consistently demonstrate higher resilience, greater creative capacity, and more sustained performance than those who lack this connection. Audiobook-Style transformation. Audiobook-Style was a founder who had spent 3 years running his startup on 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night, skipping meals regularly, exercising almost never, and functioning on coffee and willpower alone. He wore his exhaustion as a badge of dedication. When people expressed concern about his health, he told them he would rest when the business succeeded. In his 3rd year, his business was growing, but he was making increasingly poor decisions. He lost 2 key team members in 6 months. Both told him, in exit interviews, that they could not follow someone who appeared to be in perpetual crisis. He nearly lost a major client due to a communication failure that he attributed, in retrospect, to the cognitive fog that had become his permanent state. His business coach gave him an instruction he initially rejected entirely. He had to sleep 8 hours a night for 30 days as a non-negotiable experiment. The results were not gradual. Within 2 weeks, Audiobook-Style described a clarity of thinking he had not experienced in years. Within 30 days, he had made 3 strategic decisions that he described as better than almost anything he had done in the previous 3 years of semi-conscious leadership. "I thought sleep was a productivity cost," he told me. "It is a productivity investment. I was working at 30% capacity and calling it hustle." The energy architecture practice. The practical architecture of sustainable high performance has 3 non-negotiable elements. Protect your sleep. 7 to 9 hours is not a luxury. It is the maintenance interval of your cognitive hardware. Treat it with the same non-negotiability you would give a meeting with your most important client. Move your body daily, not to look a certain way, not to meet a fitness standard. Because 30 minutes of physical movement produces measurable improvements in cognitive function, mood regulation, and creative capacity that no supplement, system, or strategy can replicate. Create transition rituals. The single most effective practice for energy management that most people overlook is a deliberate ritual that marks the transition between work and non-work, a walk, a specific piece of music, a journaling practice, any consistent signal to the nervous system that one mode has ended and another is beginning. Without this transition, the stress and cognitive load of work bleeds into recovery time, preventing the restoration that recovery is supposed to produce. Jim Rohn, the philosopher of practical success who mentored Tony Robbins, Darren Hardy, and countless others, said, Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. He said it simply because the simple version is sufficient. Everything you are trying to build requires you. Take care of the infrastructure. Chapter 6. The Accountability Architecture. Why willpower alone always fails and what works instead. As Bob Proctor says, accountability is the glue that ties commitment to results. In 1960, two researchers named Sharon Bowman and Patricia Seymour conducted an experiment at a university that produced findings so consistent they have been replicated in virtually every study of goal achievement since. They divided a group of students into 4 conditions. The first group was simply told to think about their goals. The second was told to write their goals down. The third was told to write their goals down and share them with another person. The fourth was told to write their goals down, share them with another person, and send that person a weekly progress update. The completion rates: first group, approximately 40%. Second group, 60%. Third group, 76%. Fourth group, 92%. The study is not famous. The finding is uncontroversial. And yet the overwhelming majority of people attempting to change their lives operate as if they're in the first group, privately thinking about goals and hoping willpower will carry them through. Willpower will not carry you through. Not because you are weak, because willpower is structurally insufficient for the task most people assign it. The structural problem with willpower is a finite cognitive resource. Research by Roy Baumeister, who spent decades studying self-control, demonstrated that willpower depletes through use in exactly the way a muscle fatigues through exercise. Every act of self-regulation, every time you resist a temptation, make a difficult decision, or persist through discomfort, draws from the same limited pool. This means that the person who relies on willpower alone to maintain their disciplines is fighting a structural battle they cannot win. The disciplines that matter most, the hard things, the important things, the things that build a life you want, typically require the most willpower. And by the time they arrive in the day, after dozens of smaller acts of self-regulation, the willpower pool is depleted. The solution is not to develop stronger willpower. It is to design your environment and your commitments so that willpower is required as rarely as possible. It is to replace willpower with architecture. Accountability is the most powerful single component of that architecture. The 3 levels of accountability. Level 1 is self-accountability. Tracking systems, journals, habit trackers, and scheduled self-review. This is the minimum viable accountability structure. It is significantly better than nothing. It is not sufficient alone. Level 2 is social accountability. Another person who knows your commitment and expects a report. This can be a friend, a mentor, a partner, or a peer who shares a similar goal. The research shows that the mere knowledge of an upcoming accountability conversation changes behavior, because the anticipated discomfort of reporting failure to another person functions as a deterrent to the behaviors that would produce that failure. Level 3 is consequential accountability. Systems in which real, meaningful consequences are attached to performance. This can involve financial stakes, public commitments, team dependencies, or professional arrangements in which failure has tangible costs. This level produces the highest compliance rates because it introduces asymmetry. The cost of not following through exceeds the cost of doing the uncomfortable thing. Aginola's system. Aginola had been trying to complete her professional certification for 2 years. She had the study materials. She had the time. She had the genuine desire to obtain the qualification. She had started and abandoned the preparation process 4 times. She implemented a 3-level accountability system. She committed publicly on her professional network to sitting the exam within 90 days. Social stakes. She found a study partner at a similar stage of preparation. Social accountability. And she put a meaningful sum of money into an account that she would donate to an organization she actively disliked if she failed to sit the exam on a declared date. Consequential accountability. She sat the exam on day 87. She passed. The old me would have said, "I didn't need all of that," she told me. I would have said that I just needed to want more. What I actually needed was a structure that made not doing it more painful than doing it. She had correctly diagnosed the problem. It was never a motivation problem. It was an architecture problem. The accountability architecture framework. Design your accountability architecture with the following elements. Write the commitment, not in your head, on paper with a specific outcome and a specific date. Vague intentions produce vague results. I want to get healthier produces nothing. I will exercise for 30 minutes every morning at 6 a.m. for the next 90 days produces a trackable, accountable commitment. Declare it socially. Tell at least one person who will ask you about it. The anticipation of that conversation will function as a daily motivator that your private intention cannot replicate. Attach a consequence. Make the cost of not following through tangible. Financial stakes, public commitment, professional declarations. Any structure in which failure is more painful than effort. Schedule a review. Put a weekly 15-minute review in your calendar. Ask yourself 3 questions. Did I do what I committed to doing? If not, what specifically caused a miss? What structural change will prevent the same miss next week? The difference between people who achieve their goals and people who perpetually intend to achieve their goals is not character. It is architecture. Build the architecture. Chapter 7. The Subtraction Principle. Addition will never fix what subtraction can solve. As Hans Hofmann says, the ability to simplify means to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. In 2007, Steve Jobs stood on a stage in San Francisco and introduced the iPhone. What he said about it has been quoted extensively. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. What is quoted less often is what happened internally at Apple in the 3 years before that launch. The iPhone team, under Jobs' leadership, removed more features than they built. Every proposed function was subjected to a merciless question. Is this essential, or is it merely good? Features that were merely good, even some that were genuinely excellent, were eliminated. What remained was a product of radical simplicity that changed the world not despite its stripped-down elegance, but because of it. Jobs was famously brutal about subtraction. He had a sign in his office that read, "Focusing is about saying no." He understood something that most ambitious people spend years failing to grasp. Achievement is not primarily an additive process. It is a subtractive one, the addition trap. Most ambitious people, when they feel stuck, respond by adding. They add a new productivity system. They add a new morning routine. They add a new course, a new tool, a new commitment, a new strategy. They read about what successful people do and add those behaviors to an already overcrowded schedule. What they rarely do is ask, what do I need to remove? The sculptor Michelangelo, when asked how he created his extraordinary figures, reportedly said that he simply removed everything that was not David. Whether or not the exact quotation is historically precise, the principle it describes is exact. The figure was already in the marble. The sculptor's job was elimination. Your best self, your most productive, purposeful, financially successful, creatively alive self, is already inside your current life, but it is buried under commitments that do not serve it, habits that drain rather than build it, relationships that diminish rather than expand it, and activities that consume the time and energy that the important thing needs. The discipline of subtraction is a practice of finding what is not David and removing it, the audit. The practical starting point for the subtraction principle is a complete, honest audit of how you currently spend your time. For 1 week, track everything, not your planned schedule, what actually happens. Every hour, every activity. At the end of the week, categorize each activity into one of 3 groups. Group 1, activities that directly advance your most important goal. These are the things that, when done consistently, move the needle on what matters most to you. Group 2, activities that are necessary for baseline functioning. Sleep, basic self-care, essential professional obligations, non-negotiable family commitments. Group 3, everything else. For most people, Group 3 is the largest group. And within Group 3, the majority of activities are not genuinely enjoyed, not genuinely needed, and not genuinely contributing to anything they actually want. They are there because they were never specifically chosen. They accumulated by default, they were agreed to without adequate consideration, or they are habits of time use that formed around an old life that no longer exists. Ifani's deletion. Ifani ran his own logistics business and had been working 12-hour days for 2 years with income that plateaued at the same level for 18 months. He was convinced the problem was that he was not doing enough, not working hard enough, not adding enough services, not building enough systems. His business mentor sat down with him in his calendar for a full day and asked about every single commitment. What is this? Why are you doing this? What would happen if you stopped? The audit revealed that Afani was attending 3 networking events per month that had produced 0 new clients in 2 years. He was managing social media accounts himself, accounts that contributed no measurable business. He was personally handling administrative tasks that a part-time assistant could manage for a fraction of his hourly rate. He was in a business owners group that he had outgrown but had not left. He deleted all of it. In the time freed up, he deepened his relationships with his 10 best existing clients, improved his service delivery, and built a referral system. Revenue grew 40% in the next 6 months. I thought I needed to do more, he said. I needed to do less, but better. The artist Hans Hofmann, who taught generations of painters and understood creative discipline as deeply as anyone, gave us a principle in his most elegant form. Simplify by eliminating the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. In your life, the necessary is already speaking. You just cannot hear it above the noise of everything you have added. Remove what is not David, then watch what appears. Chapter 8. The Failure Reframe. The people who win are the people who lose better. As Thomas Edison says, I have not failed, I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. In 1914, the Edison Industries complex in West Orange, New Jersey, which housed the laboratories, equipment, and years of research of one of the most prolific inventors in history, burned to the ground. The fire destroyed approximately $10 million of equipment and materials, equivalent to hundreds of millions today. Thomas Edison was 67 years old. His son Charles, who witnessed the fire, later described finding his father standing in the glow of the flames, face illuminated, watching everything burn, not weeping, not in shock, watching. Go get your mother, Edison reportedly told his son. She'll never see another fire like this. The following morning, Edison reportedly gathered his staff and told them, we're starting over. All the clutter is gone. We can build it right this time. Within 3 weeks, he had restarted operations. Within a year, he had recovered. Within 2 years, he had produced more output than in the previous 3. What Thomas Edison demonstrated in the light of that fire was not indifference to loss. It was a discipline of the failure reframe, the practice ability to extract forward motion from setback rather than allowing setback to produce paralysis. The neuroscience of how failure becomes fatal. Here is what happens in most people's brains when they experience a significant failure. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection and emotional processing center, classifies a failure as a social or survival threat. This triggers a stress response, which floods the system with cortisol and narrows cognitive function to threat management mode. In this state, creativity is suppressed, risk tolerance collapses, and the brain's primary motivation becomes the avoidance of any future situation that resembles the one that produced the pain. The person does not merely feel bad about the failure. They unconsciously reorganize their behavior to prevent similar failures, which means avoiding similar attempts. This is why failure, left unprocessed, does not merely sting. It compounds. One failed business attempt becomes a belief that you are not an entrepreneur. One failed relationship becomes a belief that you are unlovable. One failed project becomes a belief that you are not capable of finishing things. The failure becomes a new layer of identity, a new chapter in the poverty script. The failure reframe does not deny the pain. It changes what the pain is allowed to mean. The 3 questions. The failure reframe is practiced through 3 specific questions that redirect the brain's processing of negative experience from threat avoidance mode into learning mode. Question 1. What specifically did not work and why? This is not a question of self-blame, but of honest diagnosis. The goal is not to feel bad about what happened, but to understand it with sufficient precision that the same mistake does not produce the same result next time. Question 2. What did I learn that I could not have learned any other way? This question is not rhetorical comfort. It is pointing at a genuine reality. The information contained in failure is different in kind from the information available through success. Failure reveals the gaps in your assumptions, the weaknesses in your system, the points where your understanding of reality was incomplete. This information is genuinely valuable, often more valuable than the information success would have provided. Question 3. What is the next specific action? This question is the mechanism by which learning becomes movement. It is a deliberate rejection of the paralysis that unprocessed failure produces. It does not ask whether you feel ready to move. It asks what direction you will move in. Aisha's third attempt. Aisha's first business closed after 11 months. Her second failed to launch after 6 months of preparation. When she began her third, people around her expressed concern, even a few she respected. She was in their framing, someone who had tried twice and failed twice. She had a different framing. From her first failure, she had learned that she had entered the market without adequate research and that her pricing model was structurally impossible to sustain. From her second, she had learned that she had partnered with someone whose values and working style were incompatible with her own, and that she had known this early, but had not acted on the knowledge. Her third business had a different pricing model. She entered with research she had spent 3 months completing. She worked alone initially, with a clear process for evaluating any future partnerships. She was not starting over. She was starting better, with 2 expensive, irreplaceable educations that no classroom could have provided. Her third business is now 5 years old and growing consistently. I do not recommend failing, she told me with a smile. But if you're going to fail, and most people who try things will fail at least once, you should get everything it has to teach you. The people who fail and learn are building toward something. The people who fail and stop are just paying tuition for a course they never completed. Edison's fire burned down the clutter. Your failures are burning something too. The question is whether you will watch them the way Edison did. Not with devastation, but with the cold clarity of someone already designing what comes next. Chapter 9. The Long Game. Why the person thinking furthest ahead wins every time. As Mark Twain says, the secret of getting ahead is getting started. The secret of getting started is breaking your complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks, and then starting on the first one. In 1994, a 30-year-old man left a high-paying job at a New York hedge fund to start an online bookstore in his garage in Seattle. His colleagues thought he was making a serious mistake. His boss, who genuinely liked him and did not want to lose him, sat with him for 2 hours trying to change his mind. The man said later that he made the decision using a framework he called the regret minimization framework, imagining himself at 80 years old looking back at his life and asking which choice he would regret more, trying a new venture and potentially failing or never trying. He chose a bookstore. His name was Jeff Bezos. The Amazon story is not remarkable because of its outcome, which was, of course, extraordinary. It is remarkable because of the decision-making framework behind it. Bezos was not thinking about the next quarter or the next year. He was thinking about the view from 80 years old. He was playing the longest game available to him, and that long game perspective led him to make a decision that a short game perspective would have made impossible. The short game versus the long game. The short game is optimized for immediate outcomes: comfort, approval, safety, and the avoidance of near-term pain. It is the game being played by the person who does not ask for the raise because rejection will be painful today, who does not start the business because failure will be embarrassing this year, who does not invest because the sacrifice of present consumption feels too great. The long game is optimized for delayed outcomes: freedom, significance, excellence, and the accumulation of things that grow in value over time: skills, relationships, assets, reputation, and self-knowledge. It tolerates significant near-term discomfort in service of long-term gains that the short game cannot imagine from its vantage point. The divergence between these two games compounds dramatically over time. At any single decision point, the difference between a short game choice and a long game choice is small, merely the difference between comfort and discomfort today. Across thousands of such decision points, compounded over decades, the difference becomes a gap between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who understood human behavior and flourishing with sophistication that continues to influence psychology more than 2,000 years later, wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit." He was describing the long game. Excellence is not achieved in a single heroic moment. It is built in the accumulated weight of thousands of small, individually insignificant moments of choosing the better thing. The delayed gratification discipline. The specific discipline of the long game is the management of the tension between present and future value, what economists call intertemporal choice. Every significant decision involves this tension. The present version of you experiences the costs, effort, discomfort, sacrifice, while the future version of you experiences the benefits, freedom, skill, financial stability, health, relationships. The difficulty is that the present self and the future self have fundamentally different perspectives. The present self experiences today's costs immediately and vividly. The future self and its benefits are abstract, distant, and easily discounted. Long game discipline is the practice of making the future self more real, more vivid, and more present in today's decision-making. The techniques that accomplish this include written future state descriptions, writing in detail about the life you are building and reading it regularly, visual representations of the future state, regular conversations with mentors or peers who are living the version of the life you are building, and a habit of explicitly asking before significant decisions, which version of me, the one 10 years from now or the one today, would be better served by this choice? Al-Yamid's decade. Al-Yamid made a decision at 24 that everyone around him thought was financially foolish. Instead of spending the income from his first professional job on upgrading his lifestyle, he invested 80% of it and lived on 20%. Not for a year, for a decade. For 10 years, he drove the same car while his peers upgraded. He lived in the same modest apartment, while people he had graduated with moved to nicer neighborhoods. He attended fewer social events, took fewer vacations, and made daily choices that positioned him as behind in the comparison game that his peer group was quietly and constantly playing. At 34, Al-Yamid had a level of financial freedom that none of his peers had reached. He had options, including the option to take significant professional risks, that the people who had spent the previous decade upgrading their lifestyles did not have. The decade of apparent sacrifice had been, in reality, the decade of the long game being played. People thought I was behind because my car was old, he told me. I was playing a different game. I was not trying to win that game. I was trying to win a game that had a much longer time horizon. Bezos from his garage, Al-Yamid from his modest apartment. The long game does not look impressive from the outside during its early stages. It only becomes visible when the compound growth reaches the phase where the shore becomes visible. Start the game. Play it consistently. Trust the horizon. Chapter 10. The Daily Non-Negotiables. 5 practices that will determine whether you build something or just think about it. As John Dryden says, we first make our habits, and then our habits make us. In 1948, a young writer in South Africa began a practice that she would maintain without significant interruption for the rest of her life. Every morning, before doing anything else, before speaking to her family, before engaging with the day's obligations, she sat down with a notebook and wrote 3 pages of unfiltered, unedited, and censored thought. Not a diary, not a polished essay, just thought, translated directly to page for 3 pages every single morning. Her name is not one you would recognize. She never published the notebooks. She was not famous, but she raised a son who watched this practice every morning of his childhood and absorbed from it a profound lesson about the relationship between daily discipline and creative output. That son eventually became a writer himself, built a career on the discipline he had observed, and passed the morning pages practice, as he called it, to millions of people through his work. The point of this story is not the outcome. It is the practice. The woman's daily non-negotiable, 3 pages every morning, before the world got to her, was the invisible foundation of everything that grew from it. The architecture of the non-negotiable. A non-negotiable is not a goal. It is not a wish. It is not something you do when you have time or when conditions are favorable. It is a behavior so fundamental to who you are and what you are building that it is not subject to the daily negotiation of competing priorities. The word is chosen with precision. Non-negotiable. Not, I usually do this. Not, I try to do this most days. Not, I do this when I remember. Not negotiable. Most people have non-negotiables in their lives already. They simply have not consciously chosen them. They brush their teeth every day. They check their phone every morning. They eat at roughly predictable intervals. These are non-negotiables. They simply are not the ones most likely to transform the trajectory of your life. The discipline in this final chapter is a conscious, deliberate selection and protection of 5 practices that represent the daily architecture of the life you are building. The specific non-negotiables that, across the research, stories, and observations that built this book, most consistently appear in the lives of people who achieve extraordinary results from ordinary starting points. Non-negotiable 1, the morning prime, the first 60 minutes of your day, before any device, news, or social media, belong entirely to you and your most important work or preparation. This hour sets the cognitive and emotional tone for everything that follows. Protect it with a ferocity you would give your most important meeting. Non-negotiable 2, the single daily advance. One specific action taken today that moves your most important goal meaningfully forward. Not a dozen activities. Not a general feeling of productive busyness. One specific, identifiable advance. If you can say precisely what it is at the start of the day and confirm that it happened at the end of the day, it counts. If you cannot, it does not. Non-negotiable 3, the body investment. Movement, daily, non-negotiable. The research on the relationship between physical exercise and cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and creative capacity is unambiguous and extensive. 30 minutes of movement is not a health strategy. It is a performance strategy. Treat it as such. Non-negotiable 4, the learning block. 30 to 60 minutes of deliberate learning in a domain that matters to your most important goal. Not entertainment, not general interest browsing. Targeted learning. Reading, courses, conversations with people who know more than you. Deliberate practice of a specific skill. Compounded across a year, this block produces an education that no institution can replicate. Non-negotiable 5, the review and reset. 10 minutes at the end of each day to ask 3 questions. What did I accomplish today that mattered? What did I learn? What will I do differently tomorrow? This practice closes a day intentionally rather than allowing to dissolve into the next, and produces a continuous self-correction that separates people who improve over time from people who simply accumulate experience without growing. The compound of the 5. Here is the mathematics of these 5 practices maintained consistently across 1 year. The morning prime, 365 hours protected, device-free, intention-setting time. The single daily advance, 365 specific, identifiable movements toward your most important goal. The body investment, approximately 90 hours of physical investment in your cognitive and emotional infrastructure. The learning block, approximately 240 hours of deliberate skill and knowledge development. The review and reset, approximately 60 hours of intentional self-correction and direction setting. Individually, none of these practices is extraordinary. Together, maintained without negotiation across a full year, they produce something that looks, from the outside, like extraordinary natural talent. From the inside, it is simply the compound effect of 5 daily disciplines practiced by someone who decided, cleanly, completely, without the comfort of the exit, that the life they wanted was worth the daily price of building it. The English poet and playwright John Dryden wrote, "We first make our habits, and then our habits make us." This sentence, written in the 17th century, is the most efficient summary of everything in this book. The habits you practice daily make you, incrementally, the person you become. The habits you allow to slide make you, equally incrementally, someone smaller. Choose your non-negotiables. Defend them. Let them make you. Conclusion: the day the excuses ended. You have now read 10 chapters, 10 disciplines, 10 specific mental and behavioral shifts that separate people who build things from people who endlessly talk about building things. I want to close with the same honesty I open with. This is not the last book you will need to read. It is not a complete system. It is not a shortcut. There is no shortcut. What this book is, if you use it correctly, is a beginning. Specifically, it is the beginning of the end of the story you have been telling yourself about why today is not the right day. The day the excuses end is not a special day. It is not preceded by a dramatic revelation or a perfect set of circumstances. It is an ordinary day, indistinguishable in its external reality from every other day, on which a person makes a specific internal decision that changes the trajectory of everything that follows. That decision is available to you today, not when you finish the next book, not when your circumstances improve, not when you feel ready, because people who wait to feel ready are still waiting when the readiness never arrives. Today, the identity is available. You can choose right now to be someone who does a thing rather than someone who plans to do the thing. The focus is available. You can choose right now to identify the one thing that matters most and give it your complete attention. The compound is available. You can choose right now to make one small advance and trust that the shore you cannot see through the fog is nonetheless there. The discomfort is available. You can choose right now to do the one thing you've been avoiding that would move your life forward. The energy is available. You can choose right now to protect your sleep and move your body tomorrow morning as a non-negotiable act. The accountability is available. You can choose right now to tell one person what you're committing to and ask them to hold you to it. The subtraction is available. You can choose right now to identify one thing in your life that is not David and remove it. The failure reframe is available. You can choose right now to look honestly at your most recent setback and ask what it was trying to teach you. The long game is available. You can choose right now to make a decision that your 80-year-old self would respect. The daily practice is available. You can choose right now to identify your 5 non-negotiables and commit to them starting tomorrow morning. The great psychiatrist Carl Jung, who spent his life studying the gap between who people were and who they were capable of becoming, wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You have made the patterns conscious. You have seen them. You have named them. What you do next is not fate. It is a choice. Make it.